Your story matters, don't let it fade. When everything changed, you were made.
When everything changed, I was lying on a bed under a twilight sedation, staring at a ceiling, at a mural of postcards from around the world, thinking to myself, I wish I was anywhere else but here. A few seconds later, my thoughts were interrupted, and I heard the doctor say, okay, it's finished. And I knew I was no longer pregnant. Now, see, I practiced a little bit of this speech on stage last night, and I felt blocked. I felt like I wasn't flowing. So I decided that today, if I'm genuinely going to come and talk to people as my most authentic, vulnerable self, to be able to impact some change, I have to do it off script. I had this whole story lined up of all the things, how words impact us and how words program us and how you become a manifestation of the words that have been told to you throughout the years. This whole story. And I couldn't understand why I felt so blocked. I wrote the whole speech. I read it many times. I couldn't memorize my own speech that I wrote. And I couldn't figure out why. I wasn't going to read the speech to my mom. And God knows how he does things, because I did. And my mom, in her very mom wisdom, asked me, how do you feel about it? And I broke down. I started crying. And I said, I'm not attached to it. It doesn't feel like me. I don't know. And so she reminded me of times when I used to give these impromptu speeches to students that I used to work with in an after school program. And she said, but think about the times when you gave those speeches to those students and then they came back and talked to you about it and they started implementing some of the things or the advice that you gave them in their own classrooms. What about them? Think about your students. Or what about the staff? Think about how much you impacted their lives. And so I thought to myself, yeah, why did at that moment did I start, and I mean crying, right? In my story, I had some pretty heavy things that I'm talking about, right? But at that moment, I felt my most vulnerable and I just broke down. And I broke down because I thought of the love that I used to have when I was working with my students and the love that I had when I was working with my staff members and the trainings that I was doing with them. When I would talk to them, it was from a place of unconditional love because I had gone through so many things during my lifetime. I had hit so many rock bottoms that I felt when I was my most loneliest was when I was in a room full of people because I felt like they couldn't understand me and because I didn't have the words to be able to express myself clearly. So I thought about that and I thought, what would I tell my staff? What would I tell my kids? What would I say to the parents to empower them to be able to keep moving forward during these times? I remember when I would go up to the kids and they were really rambunctious and teachers were yelling loudly and you could hear it across the hall. I remember that was like nails on a chalkboard for me. I hated it. So I would come out into the hall and I would get them to settle down and quiet down. And I would be able to speak loving words to them. So then I started to think about the speech and why I've been having such a hard time finding the words. I have been able to finally get to a point in my life where I understand that words have actual healing powers. I was able to understand that because I had to learn about words. I had to learn that words have actual vibrational frequencies. You have high vibrational words, you have low vibrational words. Words like hate, war, low vibration. Words like love, peace, high vibration. And I had to learn how to use these words to be able to better communicate with my students and staff. Words that up to that point in my life hadn't really been shown or given to me. You see, the reason why I was able to relate so well to my students was because I saw myself in the student who wore long sleeve t-shirts in the summertime at the beach because he had eczema. Because I was the little girl that had eczema all over her legs and arms. I was called weird. I was called gross. Whatever illness was being spread at that time, they said, "Oh, that's what she has," and they would step away from me. I was the untouchable at that moment. In middle school, there was a rumor that went around that said that I was a lesbian and pregnant because I really like to give hugs and because I was heavier set. In high school, I could never relate or figure out how to make friends with all the people that like fit a mold. So then I had a group of the most diverse kids. We nicknamed ourselves the multicultural mafia or the M&Ms. But see, all of this, all my little awkwardness and not being able to communicate or clearly express myself, I've learned that it's the thing that was my gift, right? But when I was in college, I didn't understand that. I tried to run away from all my problems. I mean, really, guys, like I tried to run away. All right. I left my house to be able to explore my sexuality freely because I didn't want anybody judging or criticizing me. I bounced around from job to job. I even tried to run away to Canada to become a nanny and ended up getting deported from one of the friendliest countries. I mean, I literally also had my mugshot taken. And so, why I say they were the friendliest is because uh, the officer at the end of taking my mugshot said, "Well, I hope this doesn't change your mind about Canada and you still come back to visit us." The irony, right? See, all of these things helped build me to make me the person that I am today. I used to think that I was flawed and I was broken, so much so that at one point in my life, I was sitting in a math class in college and I ended up having a panic attack. Luckily, that professor had an idea because he had a son with ADHD, and he was able to steer me in the direction of the psychology department at UWM that would do full psychological evaluations. So it was in my 20s when I was diagnosed with ADHD, social anxiety, depression, other anxiety, and something else that is called adjustment disorder. It's kind of a shock when you get a diagnosis like that in your 20s, because then you wonder what would have happened if I would have had an advocate or someone would have been able to see that when I was younger. Maybe it wouldn't have led me to taking a cocktail of my prescription medication and chasing it with alcohol for 2 weeks straight, hoping that I wouldn't wake up the next day. You know, for me, it was like, well, who cares? I'm broken. I didn't win in the gene pool. My life is useless. It wasn't until my mom, in her sage mother ways, told me, "Jesse, please just come home. Let me help you." Healing words, words of embrace. So I had to step in faith. And I had to hand over the bag of pills. And then again, my fall from grace moment when I had to tell my very Mexican Catholic father that I was pregnant and no longer chose to be. Those are moments that hit hard. You don't forget those things. So when I was working at the school, I recognized and I saw myself in every child, in every struggling teacher, in every struggling parent. And I thought, what if they had an advocate? What if they had someone who would just stick up for them a little bit, who would see the good in them first, didn't have to wait to prove it to me for me to already love them? What would happen if we started implementing those things in the world? If we just gave everybody the benefit of the doubt first? I'll love you first. We'll figure out the rest later. And so when things started changing in my program, is because I also had to start changing. I had to start changing my ways. I always have seen myself as this misfit, the little engine that could. I always felt like I was running to catch up to everybody else. I always felt like everybody else had figured it out before I did. Everybody had the note cards that I didn't have access to. So then I started learning, because I started getting trained in modalities such as Reiki or energy work, that everything is a vibrational frequency. So I started thinking, how can I take these concepts and start applying it to the school? How can I train people in this? Because finally, I understood a concept. I could understand energy very, very well. Words, mm, still struggle with it. It's why when I, even now as an adult and knowing everything that I know, I've still got the inner child inside of me, and I still get really shy in big groups of people. Because I learned that I pick up on all of the energy, and all of a sudden I start feeling shaky. I'm happy I'm wearing this dress because I'm shaking underneath it. But I also learned that it's okay to stand up on stage in front of a room full of people, shaky and all. Because when you give in to the fear or the anxiety or the shakiness or the fact that you feel like you're going to pass out in the middle of it, if you just take a deep breath, ground your feet, magic comes out of you. When you genuinely share your story without being in the confines, that never worked for me. I was never good at the rules. I didn't understand them. I didn't know how to speak them. And so what I ended up doing was becoming the person that I needed when I was a kid. And then when I was working with students and staff members in my after school program, I started becoming that advocate, and I started teaching them. In the beginning, it was very hard. I was standing alone. I was putting salt lamps in rooms. I was using aromatherapy, lamps all over, twinkle lights all over, because I started learning about the frequencies of lights and how they affect students. And I would have people coming in and, what's that smell? But I knew that even though people didn't understand it, it was what I had to do, right? Many times in my life, I have known to be standing alone in moments that were very difficult, when nobody else understood me or didn't want to accept the words that I was saying, and I had to stand alone in my conviction. And many times in my life, I have had those moments where I felt like quitting. I felt like being done with life. And I would hear the voice of God saying, "You are destined for greatness." And that was what would help me get back up again and keep going. So I wanted to take all of these things and put them into the classroom. And even if no one else was believing me, and even if my words weren't being heard, I was going to program these classrooms with high intentions. And I started posting positive words all over the classroom spaces. I started putting the lamps on and the twinkle lights. We started playing images of rainforests and oceans for the kids to see. Eventually, when the teachers would forget to turn on the lights and the ocean or put on the smells, our students were the ones that would remind them to do it. It took a while. It did. And it's kind of like what we're doing now, right? I decided that because I saw great impact in what I was doing in the school, and even though words or curriculums or things hadn't been designed yet to be out there helping other people do it, I decided, well, I'm going to step out in faith and courage. knowing that this is important, teaching people about vibrational frequencies, and that you can first start programming spaces before the rest of the people get on board. People have to feel it first before they actually believe you. And if you come to the table truly authentic and vulnerable, you can really impact some really great change. I was able to befriend some of the teachers that really didn't have a lot of friends. Those ended up becoming my best friends because what we ended up learning was that we actually had a lot of similarities. We were also vulnerable. We also hurt. So I took that idea and I thought, well, what if I started teaching and training and coaching people in how to do that? Because we're at an age now where we're speaking energy. And our kiddos in the classrooms that are having the hardest times, those are energy workers too. We got to learn how to speak them. So as adults, then how do we learn how to do that, to hold the space for that? Can we take that to corporate offices? Can we take that outside into the world? I know we can. I'm in a room full of people who are already doing that, spreading your message, teaching other people. So for me, I have faith because I did it for myself. I was able to teach kids. And honestly, the kids were the ones who picked up on it the fastest, understood it, carried it, and then eventually ended up teaching the teachers. That's the cool thing about it. We all have an inner child inside of us that at one point in life gets triggered. So I have faith that we can do it. If we sit down at the table and start having vulnerable conversations, we start saying, hey, I'm scared. I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to learn and I'm willing to apply. What kind of leadership could we develop? How could we really carry this on so that generations to come can just keep getting stronger and better and healthier and cut generational trauma? What can we do when we practice vulnerability and start looking at the good in each other first? I don't have to agree with you on everything, but I know that you're human and you are coming from somewhere. And I'm going to trust and have faith that you have good intentions because that's how I am. And I don't always get it right. I throw temper tantrums too. But alongside with that, we can also then learn how to communicate better. So, my hope for you and for myself is that one day we'll be able to come to the table together and have those really vulnerable conversations where we walk away just changed people because of the healing power of our words. And in the end, I know we all have it in us. We just got to work on it together. Thank you.